My in-laws went to Hawaii, leaving me to care for my SIL's bedridden daughter, but when they left, the moment they drove away, a strange kind of silence fell over the house, a silence that felt both heavy and liberating. My in-laws, with their matching Hawaiian shirts and overpacked suitcases, had finally left for their 2-week vacation. The car was barely out of sight before I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. It wasn't just the relief of seeing them go, it was the weight of responsibility that settled upon me. They'd asked, no, they'd demanded, that I care for my sister-in-law's bedridden daughter, Lily, while they were gone. I loved Lily, she was like a daughter to me. But this wasn't about love, it was about obligation. My husband, Tom, had assured me it would be okay, that I was strong, that I could handle it. Yet, with each passing second, the lie of those words became clearer. As the silence wrapped around me, I glanced at Lily's closed bedroom door and a deep sense of foreboding washed over me. There was something about this entire situation that felt profoundly wrong. I just didn't know what it was yet. And as if on cue, a muffled sob came from Lily's room, a small crack in the silence, revealing that this wasn't going to be a simple babysitting gig. This was something far more complex, far more heartbreaking, and, I suspected, far more dangerous than anyone had let on. My name is Kira, and I've always strived to be the peacekeeper, the one who holds everything together. I married into the Sterling family 5 years ago, and while Tom is a good man, his family, well, they're another story altogether. The Sterlings are a family of outward appearances. They live in a large, imposing house on the edge of town, and every aspect of their lives seems meticulously curated for public consumption. Mr. Sterling, a retired lawyer, is all stern pronouncements and polished shoes, while Mrs. Sterling is a whirlwind of social engagements and judgmental glances. They value wealth, social status, and what others think of them above all else. I, on the other hand, grew up in a much smaller, humbler home where love and genuine connection trumped all else. My parents were loving and kind, and we valued each other. We were not wealthy, but we were rich in our affections. This difference in values has always created a subtle undercurrent of tension between me and the Sterlings, though they often disguised it as family concern. Before meeting Tom, my life was relatively simple. I worked as a librarian, surrounded by the quiet comfort of books and stories, content with a peaceful routine. Then came Tom. He was different from his family, kind, gentle, and with a quiet humor that always made me smile. It was easy to fall in love with him, to imagine a life where our differences complemented each other. It wasn't until after the wedding, when I started to see his family's true colors, that I began to realize the depth of the challenges that lay ahead. Tom's sister, Sarah, was a bit of a wild card. She'd always been a source of contention in the family, constantly seeking validation and attention, and often failing to achieve either, ending in erratic behavior. When she got pregnant with Lily as a teenager, it was a scandal that reverberated through the family. She was forced by her parents to give the baby up for adoption so as to not stain the Sterling family name, while Sarah spiraled further. A year later, she demanded that they take her back, after getting a lawyer, saying, "My daughter is a Sterling and she will be raised as one." And so Lily came to live with the Sterlings. Sarah never really recovered from the situation. She moved out soon after, barely staying in contact with her parents or her daughter. A few years later, a tragic accident left Lily bedridden, and, to everyone's surprise, the Sterlings stepped in as her full-time caregivers. They seemed to relish the role of devoted grandparents, although I could see their gestures of care were more for the image than anything else. The house always felt like a gilded cage, full of unspoken expectations and subtle manipulations. Mrs. Sterling's comments about my simpler background, or Mr. Sterling's thinly veiled suggestions about how I could elevate myself, were common. They treated me like an outsider who needed to be molded into the perfect Sterling daughter-in-law. But I also knew their devotion to the outward image had never wavered. Lily became not just a granddaughter, but a project, a public display of their compassion and generosity. And I was often forced into the role of the loving aunt. Despite the tension, I genuinely loved Lily. She was a bright, kind, and resilient girl, always trying to find joy in the little things, even amidst her constant challenges. Over the years, I would visit often, playing games, reading to her, and becoming her confidant. Our connection was a beacon of light in the otherwise oppressive atmosphere of the Sterling household. I never let any ill feelings toward her grandparents interfere with the love I felt for her. I'd noticed the weight of expectation that was placed on her, being the family's beacon of morality and good deeds. And so, there was this quiet unspoken understanding between us, a silent pact of love and understanding that seemed almost sacred to me. A few weeks ago, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling announced their plans for their Hawaiian vacation. It was supposed to be a much-needed break, they said, and they had booked it without discussing it with anyone. But then, they came to us with their request. "Kira, dear," Mrs. Sterling said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "since you're so good with Lily, we thought you could take care of her while we're away." They'd made it sound like a request, but it was more of a demand, thinly veiled as a family obligation. Tom had tried to speak up for me, but his parents quickly dismissed his concerns. "You know your wife is more than capable, Tom, and Lily needs someone who loves her," Mrs. Sterling had countered, effectively shutting down any argument. I knew I couldn't refuse. Lily needed me, and so, with a heavy heart and a forced smile, I agreed. Now, as they were gone, I felt a shiver of unease, a sense that this was much more than a simple act of babysitting. The core of our family drama was, without a doubt, the complex web of relationships between the Sterlings and those they deemed outsiders, like me and, in a way, even Lily. Mr. Sterling, the patriarch, was a man who thrived on control. His retirement from law hadn't diminished his need to dictate every aspect of his family's lives. He saw the world in terms of power and social standing, often using his wealth and status to assert his dominance. His interactions were always calculated and cold, each word carefully chosen to maintain his position. He saw me as someone Tom had brought in and that needed to be refined and shaped to be a Sterling. He wanted me to be his own project, in a way, but I knew I never would. Mrs. Sterling, on the other hand, was the master of passive aggression. She wielded her charm like a weapon, always with a smile and an undertone of judgment. She was the keeper of the family's social image, obsessed with appearances and ensuring that the Sterling name remained untarnished. She had never accepted me as her equal, seeing me as a threat to the family's carefully constructed facade. I had witnessed this many times before, like when she had openly criticized me for my dress choices or my simple wedding, which she called lacking elegance. With Lily, it was a little different. She would always speak of Lily as if she was a good deed that they had done to improve their image, which was one of the reasons why Lily resented them. Tom, my husband, was caught in the middle. He loved his family, but he was also aware of their flaws. He would often try to mediate between them and me, which only ended in him getting dragged into their schemes. He was a kind man, but, like most men of wealthy and powerful families, he also struggled to stand up to his parents. It was something that had always frustrated me, his inability to assert himself. I often wondered how he had ended up being so different from his parents, and perhaps that is what had attracted me to him in the first place. He always told me that he loved the person that I was, my simplicity, my calmness, the fact that I wasn't interested in their games. He loved that I gave my time to Lily and never expected anything back from her. We had built a world that felt separate from his family, a refuge of peace and shared affection, but I knew that, eventually, our worlds would collide again. Sarah, Lily's mother, remained a volatile presence in our lives. Her erratic behavior stemmed from years of being controlled by her parents and feeling abandoned. She would disappear for months at a time, only to reappear when she needed something. Lily, although only 14, was wise beyond her years. Her physical limitations had forced her to be observant and intuitive. She had a sharp mind and a deep understanding of the complexities of the Sterling family. Our connection was not just about love, but mutual trust and respect. I had always treated her like an equal, and she appreciated that. She was the person I felt most connected to in this family, and I feared that she knew the real truth behind her grandparents better than anyone else. The Sterlings were deeply concerned with appearances, but it was clear that their treatment of Lily was rooted in more than just genuine care. The way they spoke of her in public versus the way they treated her in private were two completely different things. In public, they would speak of her with affection and devotion, carefully choosing their words to portray them as the ideal grandparents. But in private, their care was perfunctory, more about fulfilling their obligations than anything else. There were times when they would ignore her needs, often leaving her alone for hours, while they attended social events or were in their study, or would scold her for being too needy. This duality created an environment of constant tension, a silent battle for control and perception. The subplots that fueled the main issue were hidden beneath layers of societal expectations and family secrets. There was the underlying resentment Sarah felt towards her parents for making her give up her daughter. There was Tom's struggle with his parents' disapproval of me and their attempts to control every aspect of his life. And, of course, there was the constant tension between the facade that the Sterlings showed the world and the reality of their dysfunction. The house was filled with their unspoken secrets, their manipulations, and their insatiable desire to control. I, as an outsider, had become the unwilling observer of their game, slowly realizing that I was a pawn in their carefully curated world, just like Lily. The first few days after the Sterlings left were relatively uneventful. I settled into a routine, ensuring that Lily was comfortable and cared for. I would wake up early to prepare her meals, administer her medication, and help her with her daily exercises. I spent hours reading to her, playing her favorite music, and simply talking to her about everything and anything. Lily seemed calmer and happier without her grandparents around. "It's so nice to have you here, Kira," she would say. "It feels like I can finally breathe." She seemed to thrive on the normalcy that I brought, the absence of their judgmental stares and perfunctory care. But then small things started to happen, strange occurrences that set my unease into full-blown suspicion. The first was a series of phone calls from a private number, always when I was alone in the house. The calls were silent, no one ever spoke on the other end, but I could hear heavy breathing and rustling noises. I tried to dismiss it as a prank, but it kept happening, often 2 or 3 times a day, filling me with a growing sense of paranoia. Tom didn't believe me and dismissed it by saying that it could be from a telemarketer, or a scammer. "Just block the number, love," he would say, but it still bothered me. Then there were the subtle, but noticeable changes in Lily's medical routine. The dosages on her medication were slightly off from what her doctors had prescribed, her chart had pages missing, and her routine seemed to have been adjusted to fit the Sterling schedule rather than her actual needs. It was like someone had been intentionally altering things, and it became clear that it hadn't started just when they went on their trip. I started keeping a meticulous record of everything, noting the changes and irregularities. One evening, while searching for a specific book in Lily's room, I found a hidden notebook tucked away in her bedside drawer. It was filled with Lily's handwriting, small, neat, and full of shocking revelations. She had documented her grandparents' true nature, their neglect, their harsh words, and even the subtle ways they would manipulate her. There were entries detailing how Mrs. Sterling would often force her to participate in social events, despite her discomfort, using her as a pity card to garner sympathy. The most disturbing entry was about her medical care. "They give me more medicine when they have to go to an important party. Mommy told me they don't want me to cause them problems when they are gone." It was heartbreaking to read, but it confirmed my worst suspicions. That same night, the mysterious phone call started again, but this time, as I answered the phone, I heard a faint voice, a raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine. "She knows too much, she's not supposed to know." Before I could react, the call was cut off. It was enough to turn my unease into pure terror. I knew that my growing fears were not just paranoia, but were rooted in the reality of the Sterling family's dark secrets. I spoke with Lily, very careful with my words, and she confirmed my suspicions. "They don't like that we talk," she said. "They want me to believe they are doing this for me, but I know the truth." It was clear that Lily was not just a victim in this situation, but a co-conspirator. There was a quiet rebellion brewing beneath her calm exterior. We decided to team up, to unearth their secrets and expose them. I started looking for more evidence, carefully searching the house, trying to find anything that could corroborate what Lily had been saying. I found old documents, bank records, and even a hidden file in Mr. Sterling's study detailing the adoption of Lily. It wasn't Sarah's choice to give up Lily after all. She had been forced into it by her parents, who had then manipulated the process to give them legal custody. They wanted the image of compassion without the burdens of actual motherhood. As the pieces began to fall into place, a horrific picture of abuse, manipulation, and control was forming. The Sterling's perfect facade was crumbling, revealing the cruel and calculating people they truly were. Each revelation fueled my determination to expose them and protect Lily from their toxic influence. The house felt increasingly menacing, each shadow hiding a new layer of their deception. I knew I had to act, and quickly. The phone calls, the missing medical charts, the hidden notebook, they all came together in a terrifying mosaic of betrayal. I knew they weren't just neglectful, they were actively trying to control Lily, and now, it seemed, they were trying to control me too. I decided the best place to confront them would be at a family gathering, during their welcome back party. I needed to do it publicly, so there would be no way for them to twist the narrative or hide their actions. The party was supposed to be a celebratory occasion, a grand return, but I had other plans. The day of the party arrived, and the house was filled with the usual Sterling's pomp and circumstance. The guests arrived, each one greeting Mr. and Mrs. Sterling with carefully rehearsed admiration. Tom was by my side, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I knew I had to tell him, but I needed to do it at the right moment when the truth would have the most impact. The fake smiles, the carefully crafted conversations, they all seemed so artificial now, knowing what I knew. The Sterlings were the picture of pride, basking in the attention, completely oblivious to my plan. As they started to give their welcome back speech, I decided it was time to act. I had compiled all the evidence I had found, Lily's journal, the altered medical records, the financial documents, everything. When Mrs. Sterling finished her speech about how much they had missed the family, I stepped forward and asked if I could say a few words. My voice was firm and steady, not at all like the meek daughter-in-law they thought I was. Mrs. I began, my voice resonating throughout the room. I believe there are a few things that the family needs to hear. I could see the confusion and the hints of annoyance on their faces. They had no idea of what was about to come. I continued to speak calmly, methodically laying out each of their transgressions. I started with the phone calls, exposing their attempt at intimidation. Someone has been calling me with a private number. They just breathed. When I answered yesterday, they told me she knows too much, she's not supposed to know. I then introduced Lily's journal, reading excerpts that exposed the harsh reality of their neglect and abuse. Lily was never just a project or a way to make you look good. She is a person. And she has feelings. Then, I introduced the doctored medical records. I approved that her medication dosage had been altered to better suit your schedules, not Lily's needs. The doctor never changed the dosage. People started to gasp, their gazes shifting from me to the Sterlings, their faces full of disbelief. They tried to interrupt, to deny my claims, but I was prepared. I had copies of everything, and every time they tried to speak I would cut them off, introducing more evidence. I then presented the financial documents proving how they had manipulated the adoption, how they had Navand or really wanted Lily to be with Sarah. You took her from her mother not because it was the best thing for her, but because it suited your narrative. You wanted to be the benevolent grandparents, but you have always put your image over your granddaughter. Had no doubts now. The facade was gone, and the true, cruel faces of the Sterlings were on full display. The room was silent, the only sounds were the murmurs and gasps of disbelief. Even Tom was staring at me, his eyes wide with shock and a touch of admiration. I had never been this assertive before, and I knew I was finally standing up for myself, for Lily, for all of us. The Sterlings were silent, their faces contorted with rage, fear, and a hint of shame. Mr. Sterling finally found his voice, his usual authoritative tone shaky. "This is absurd. These are lies, all lies," he shouted. But no one moved. No one spoke. The spell was broken, the magic gone. Mrs. Sterling tried to dismiss it, calling it a desperate attempt at attention, but the weight of the evidence was too strong. I ended by saying, "Lily has been brave for a long time, and now she won't have to hide anymore." I then looked at Tom. "I needed you to hear this with your own ears." He was shocked, but there was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I had no idea," he whispered, "and I knew that I needed to continue my fight. I knew that things had changed forever, and there was no going back now." As I finished speaking, Lily wheeled herself into the room, her eyes fixed on her grandparents. "I know everything, and I don't want to live here anymore," she said, her voice clear and strong, breaking down her grandmother's narrative that she was helpless. There was no more room for denial. The truth was out, and the Sterlings had nowhere to hide. The climax was explosive, with each word I spoke shattering the perfect image they had worked so hard to maintain. The confrontation was more than just a revelation, it was a liberation. And I knew it would forever change everything. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was chaos. The guests, who had once been so impressed by the Sterlings' wealth and status, were now whispering among themselves, their expressions a mix of shock and disgust. Some of them left almost immediately, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding drama. Others stayed, curious to see how it would all play out. Tom, still reeling from the revelations, pulled me aside, tears in his eyes. "I had no idea," he repeated. "I'm so sorry, Kira. I should have seen it." I could see the genuine pain in his face, the realization that his family was not who he thought they were. I wrapped my arms around him, a small comfort amidst the storm. "We have to get Lily out of here," I whispered. The Sterlings, cornered and exposed, tried to salvage what they could. Mr. Sterling, his face red with anger, started shouting threats, demanding that I retract my statements, and threatening to sue me. Mrs. Sterling, her composure finally cracking, began sobbing, trying to manipulate the crowd with her tears. "How could you do this to your own family?" she wailed. But this time, no one believed her act, no one was sympathetic. Their power had waned, and their manipulation was finally exposed for what it was. Lily's intervention, her clear and decisive words, had made all the difference. And Tom finally looked like he had woken up, his face serious and strong. The old submissive son was gone, now it was the man I loved that had emerged. I started getting the legal wheels in motion to ensure Lily's safety. I reached out to Sarah, telling her everything that had happened. To my surprise, she was calm and collected, seemingly unsurprised by the Sterlings' behavior. "I always knew they were capable of anything," she said, her voice full of sorrow and regret. "I should have fought for Lily sooner." We talked for hours, making plans for Lily's care, for her future. I could see the mother in her, the fierce love for her daughter. Together, we decided to petition for full custody, ensuring that Lily would be safe and loved, away from her toxic grandparents. Lily was going to live with her mother, with all the love that had been kept from her. The days following the party were a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers, social workers, family meetings, and police reports. The Sterlings' image was destroyed, and their reputation was tarnished. The social circles that they were a part of had turned their backs on them. It was as if the entire house, and the entire life they had built had been turned upside down. Tom stood by my side through it all, finally understanding the depth of his family's manipulations. He decided to cut all ties with his parents, realizing that their toxicity had infected every aspect of his life. He vowed to be a better man, to stand up for what was right, regardless of the consequences. It was like a new chapter in our marriage, a chance to rebuild on a foundation of honesty and trust. The emotional toll of the confrontation was immense. I felt drained and exhausted, but also strangely liberated. I had finally broken free from the shackles of the Sterling cetaceans, and I had helped Lily do the same. I was also afraid of what would come next. I had no illusions of the Sterlings suddenly becoming good, and I was ready to fight for Lily and her rights, and mine. But this time I knew that I would have Tom by my side, for all of it. The reflection was bittersweet. I was glad for the changes that had been made, but I also mourned the loss of the family I thought I had. I had discovered that the family I married into was a cruel and calculating group of people, who were more concerned about their image than their relationships. The aftermath wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It had exposed the Sterlings' deceit and had finally set Lily and I free. But, most importantly, it forced Tom to know the truth about his family. The resolution to our story was not a simple fairy tale ending, but it was a new beginning for all of us. Lily moved in with Sarah, and their bond grew stronger every day. Sarah found work and became the best mom Lily could ask for. The transformation was remarkable. She was no longer the fragile girl I knew at Sterling's. She was a young woman full of life and hope. She started attending school again, making new friends, and for the first time in her life, she was surrounded by genuine love and support. I remained close to her, visiting often, and continuing to be the aunt she had always trusted. I was not there in an official capacity, I was there because I loved her. We became our own kind of family, chosen family built on trust and affection. Tom and I moved out of the Sterlings' house. We bought a small, cozy house in the countryside, far away from the suffocating influence of his family. The process was long and expensive, but we were finally free. Our marriage, tested by the ordeal, grew stronger. We had survived and thrived through the drama and had become a true partnership. He finally stood up to his parents and cut contact with them. He had chosen me, and my fight had become his too. He started going to therapy, working through the years of manipulation, and growing into the man I always knew he could be. There were still moments of sadness, but we also allowed for joy, peace, and happiness to become our new normal. The Sterlings, on the other hand, faced public scrutiny and social isolation. Their attempts to regain their social standing were unsuccessful, and they became pariahs in their own community. Had been so concerned about their image, now, they had nothing to show for it. Their wealth and power could not buy them back their reputation, and they were left with the bitter taste of their cruelty. They remained isolated, refusing to admit any wrongdoing, consumed by their bitterness and pride. Although it was difficult, I tried to forgive them, not for them, but for my peace of mind. But I knew that I would never trust them again. The legal battle for Lily's custody took time, but in the end, we won. Sarah was granted full custody, and Mr. and Mrs. Sterling were legally prohibited from contacting her. It was a bittersweet victory, knowing how much suffering had been caused by their greed. It was the closing of an old chapter and the beginning of a new one. We became, all of us, a new and improved version of ourselves, having broken free from the toxic influence of the Sterlings, finally healing and finding true happiness. The resolution was satisfying because it was real. There was no perfect ending, but there was truth, justice, and a sense of hope for the future. We had all learned and grown from the experience, and I knew that we had finally created the family that we always should have had. The journey we embarked on was filled with betrayal, manipulation, and shocking revelations, but in the end, it brought us to a place of truth and freedom. We faced a toxic situation head-on and came out stronger on the other side, creating our own version of FA. I hope my story shows you that no matter how dire your situation may seem, it's always possible to find your truth and your inner voice, and that chosen families can become the best versions you can find. Remember to always trust your gut, to protect those you love, and never let anyone control your life. Share your thoughts in the comments below, tell me if you have had similar experiences, and remember that you are not alone. And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of family drama and resilience. Thank you for listening.